Tim Smith of the Smith Group here at Cinna Newport, presenting our podcast Room to share and highlight the amazing stories, people, places, and properties of Southern California to the world. Today, my guest is Michael Davidson, CEO of Alder, great friend. Can't wait to start this conversation. Welcome.
Yeah.
So good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Flying
in. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
So,
thank you.
Before we get started, I always want to make this very Southern California centric. And I know you're now in Nashville, and it's more of a occupational geographic thing. But talk to me about what brought you to Orange County, because I know you didn't grow up here, and your feelings and fondness of Southern California.
Well, I did. I spent some years in Orange County growing up. Then I lived in Texas. Then I went to college in the Bay Area, and then came back to Orange County. But really, for the opportunity to build and grow Gen Next. And after meeting Paul Macarishian and getting to know kind of his vision and his passion and the depth, I was very excited about that. But also, I really loved that. I like that Orange County it's more dynamic than I think it's given credit to for the country at large, because it has a bit of the association of like the OC and Laguna Hills.
Which, if you're in Europe, you say the OC, and they're like the OC, like that's the OC. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also innovation hubs here. There's also manufacturing here. It's a large county. It's pretty diverse. So I think, in other words, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
But I loved, especially as Gen X started to grow across the country. I remember I was doing an interview with a prominent magazine, and they wanted to continue the conversation. They were like, "Oh, let's meet can we meet next week? Are you in DC? Are you in New York?" And this meeting was in New York, and I'm like, "No, I'm in Orange County, California." And they're like,
and like the music stopped.
Yeah.
Like,
what is a group like this that's so soulful and purposeful, being born out of Southern California, out of Orange County, California? So I love that that's part of our story. One, because there is an element of, frankly, status. Like these are people of considerable means who live at a place that's known worldwide for its kind of wealth and polish. And they're also extremely purposeful and deep and curious and worldly. And without entrepreneurs, executives, people like you in Orange County, this idea of leading and making a difference for future generations wouldn't have spread across the country.
So I've traveled everywhere. We've traveled together, been on some amazing trips. And every time I come back to Orange County, and I didn't grow up here, so I moved here. I'm a transplant. I literally come back here. I'm like, this place is unbelievable. And the interesting thing, being in the real estate business, the secret is no longer a secret.
Yeah.
Like, because COVID, whatever that transition, whatever that purge, whatever happened with working remotely, a hypersensitivity to safety, lifestyle, climate, like really think about how you live. Now it's like we're seeing people from everywhere come here. And so that's what the whole genesis of this podcast is. Let's talk about it. Let's expose it. You talked about Gen Next, which some of the viewers know, some of them don't. Let's talk about, I mean, give me your kind of elevator pitch, Gen Next, and now transition to Alder.
Got it.
And that's kind of how we met through other people, but give us that.
I mean, by way of vision and mission, it's the same. We're trying to champion the ideas and the people who set up future generations for success. And so
so slow down. Champion the people for future
and the ideas.
Yeah. Like
so I'm gonna use some, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I'll use some nerdy words.
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
So
you are a nerd, but
I'm totally a nerd.
One, right?
I'm totally a nerd. So it's a disclaimer.
The most well-read person on the planet. Yeah.
I'm a nerd. But let's even make it a little bit more personal, kind of to start with. We say future generations, posterity, etc. But let me just say, like, my kids.
Yeah.
Your kids.
Right.
Your kids have a very entrepreneurial father.
Right.
They have you take risks, you've innovated, you've created value, you've created opportunity. You are a living, breathing example of the sort of bounty and purpose of free enterprise. And your kids are going to learn about taking risks, about creating wealth, about creating opportunity by watching you. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Hopefully.
They will also learn about what you care about. They will learn about your philanthropy. They will learn about how you engage in your community. They're going to learn about how you're having meaningful conversations in the community. And I don't think enough of our kids let me say this differently. Not enough of our parents are setting the type of example you're trying to set. And so, we're not a parenting organization, but we are trying to take the best and the brightest in the country and connect them to two things. One, what are the ingredients for a life well lived so you could influence the people around you and you could live a legacy and not wait till later in your life?
Do you know what the ingredients of a life well lived? Do we have like 5 or 6 or 7?
Yeah, and there's an abundance of study going back to the ancients, even to now.
Let's just spitball. Give me the 5.
Relationships.
So deep, meaningful relationships.
Deep, meaningful relationships are critical.
Yeah.
So community is critical.
Okay.
A commitments in general, commitments to your own growth, commitments to your family, commitments to your values. Those are ingredients for a life well lived. Taking the long view. So not being so short-sighted.
Totally.
And we have there's a reason I think why so much loneliness and division runs rampant in the country today. And I think it's because we're staring at what's right in front of our screens and we're overwhelmed with information. It's totally disorienting. And that causes us to withdraw from one another. And it causes us to withdraw.
It's the disconnector, dude.
Totally. And you withdraw from our commitments.
But it's like an addiction. You watch kids with it, and it's like, would you rather sit and talk with your family and play a game, or do you want to get on that? And it's just like, it's like
hook. It might as well be nicotine.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's just technology, but you just have an information overload. Yeah. It's coming at you from all different directions. But commitments, which really means a exploration of your values, like what do you want to stand for? Not what do you want to do, but who do I want to be?
Yeah.
And I think the happier people, they ask themselves these questions and they try to answer them.
Yeah.
The people who, and you see this especially with wealth, they say that wealth doesn't change you, it reveals you.
Yeah.
And now that we're a wealthy country, we're revealing a side of ourselves that is more tribal, more divisive, more short-sighted, and less resilient.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a problem. So we're setting a bad example for the kids. But let me go back to what is the meaning of life well lived? So you have commitments, you have values, you have relationships, you have forethought. You're thinking about how are you making things better. People want to be needed. They want to be valued.
Yeah.
And the thing that is different about this country and the idea of this country is that our entire system, our entire free and open system, democracy, free enterprise, and all of the things that it unleashes onto the world and in our own lives, it comes with an expectation that we live meaningful lives.
Right.
If the people don't live meaningful lives, then we won't set a good example for our kids.
Yeah.
We won't have healthy politics. We won't have healthy culture. And so we're trying to really
Well, it's something I just keep on thinking while you're talking. Wealth and happiness, you think there would be a relationship. There's actually an inverse relationship.
Yeah, some of the happiest people are the poorest
more
people.
Wealthy you are, the more you become a slave to your things, the more it keeps you out of the relationships. I mean, when we were in Africa, in Rwanda, remember we were going to hike the jungle and all the little kids there?
Yeah.
I mean,
and some of these kids have never even seen an image of themselves. Remember we were taking a picture with them and they had never seen an image of themselves.
And we'll float that on here, but it's just like you look at, they don't know where the next meal's coming, but just to have some attention they were so happy.
Let's go. Let me even go do another example from our trip to Rwanda. We were going to meet the victims of the genocide.
Right.
These women who have had endured pure horror.
I mean, give a little snapshot of that for the listeners.
In Rwanda?
Yeah.
So basically about 1 million people were slaughtered in 100 days.
Yeah.
I mean, just like that, close to 1 million people.
And what's interesting,
largely by machete, so very violent. They used the radio to spread this vitriol.
The thing that was most interesting when I was talking to the people, I remember I got there, I was in my cab driver, I went to the museum, And when he was explaining the genocide, he's like, you didn't understand. The people that instantly were against us were the people that taught me school, because these two tribes were waged to go against each other. And so brothers and families were killing friends. It was like...
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up, because I think it's instructive to the points that we're making about how to go deep and live well. We'll get to live freely in a minute.
Yeah.
But we were going to go meet these women who were victims of the genocide. One in particular, and a friend of ours, Ambassador Pierre Prosper, he prosecuted the Rwanda genocide case. And because they won that case, mass raping became a form of genocide in international law.
Right.
Throughout history, it was never that.
Right.
But when these women were going to testify in the trial, they were harassed. In some cases, I think one of the women, her husband was killed, her daughter was killed. And so they had to go and face this horror over and over and over again. And so we were going to go meet them, and it was going to be a lesson in courage and a lesson in purpose, but it became a lesson in happiness to me. You remember when we rolled up, we were going down the dirt road. We thought we were just going to meet about 5 of them, and it ended up being 50 of these women who have endured unimaginable hardship, and they were the happiest, most joyful people. And what did they keep talking about? They kept talking about their dignity.
Well, the funny thing is like their whole thing is they just wanted to have a voice.
That's it.
Right? They weren't looking for compensation. They wanted their voice to be heard. And the movie that was made about it, what was the movie called again? Do you remember?
The Uncondemned.
The Uncondemned. Everybody should watch it. But like sitting in that room with all those women that were making us food and loving us, and
singing.
The thing that shocked me
and dancing.
Is the kid that was HIV positive, that his mother was raped and had the kid. And I was just like, this is like just too much to handle.
Yeah.
HIV positive. She had the kid being a victim of rape. And this kid was like, I mean, just the.
Now but contrast that with the things that trouble, first world problems, right?
Yeah.
Your phone's not working.
Right.
The valet didn't show up in time. Right. The hotel room that you want to enjoy.
Your flight's delayed.
Et cetera, et cetera. Very, very different.
Right.
And so it does put the adversity puts into perspective. How you get through it is also how you live a good life when you have more.
Right.
You're grateful for what you have. You commit to your friends and family, and you commit to being the best version of yourself. And that's what these women did. That's also, I think, what the country at large is trying to do. To your point about forgiveness, is they had a policy of forgiveness, and it was literally a government policy to try to rebound from this. And so you could hootsie tootsie, you had to forgive, and you had to move on. And so literally people would be trying to raise their kids next to people who were violent enemies of one another just recently.
Yeah. It's just like, just forget about it.
Human beings are capable of a lot.
Yeah.
And where I think that the more comfortable you get, the more you forget that you're really capable of a lot.
Yeah.
So going back to the point about human flourishing, is it really is looking at what are these things that help people live well, but not just sort of like in a bubble. I don't mean well like comfortable.
Right.
You might be comfortable.
Right.
But I mean well like meaningful.
Like meaningful, passionate. You sleep well at night, at peace with yourself.
It's rest. David Brooks wrote this book called Second Mountain.
Yeah.
And he contrasts this idea of there's resume virtues and there's eulogy virtues. Most people spend a disproportionate amount of their time, energy, money, their own sense of value on the resume virtues.
Yeah.
Did I accomplish X? Did I make Y? Am I known for Z? But really, when you're up against a wall, what you really want people to say about you is that you had a big heart. You were a joy to be around.
It's an interesting point.
You made other people better.
It's an interesting point.
You stood for something.
I went to 4 funerals last year. I've never had so many people close to me pass away in a year. I've really had never anybody, but I went to one that was such a celebration. And this man was not affected by money, right? Never wealthy to the extent he had things, because it like passed through him. Yeah. When he saw a need, he'd give it up. There were hundreds of people. I took my 9-year-old son, which a lot of people are like, you're taking him to a funeral? I'm like, yeah, I want him to have a vision of what a life well lived looked like.
Yeah.
All 6 kids got up, and every one of them, the things they said, and anybody that knew him just knew that the guy he gave me a car. I worked for him. I didn't have a car. I wrecked my car. He gave me a car. And it's like, that's just who he was. But everybody there, he had been, his whole life was about service.
That's awesome.
Right. And it's amazing when you see that.
And I love that you took your son. It's funny you say that, because last year I took my son when he was about 11 to a funeral also.
You're like, that's morbid. You're like, well, is it morbid?
Yeah, but what he was in awe.
Yeah, same.
Of what this person's, and we didn't know this person. We just heard about it happening in the community because he was a servant leader.
Yeah.
And a friend of ours encouraged it, sent it to me, and was like, you should go. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take my son. So there were a lot of military there, and he got to see the impact that a person's values, not achievements, can have on the people around them. And it really took him. He was even talking about it like 2 weeks ago. So
it's hard though. That's hard because I love my things, dude. I love my comfort. There's a comfort crisis in the world because of me. I like the comfort.
There is a comfort crisis in the world, but I don't think that we should be a people who think that we can't have a spirit of abundance and a spirit of gratitude.
Yeah.
And be able to.
But it's not that easy to be the widow's mite, right? It's easy to give. It's easy to do when you still have a storehouse to take care of. It's when you have to give that you don't have.
Yeah.
It becomes a different challenge.
So we do from Gen X to Alder, I think the same thing is
back to we could make this a series, I know, and like I really do think you will be the president of the United States. There's nobody, in my opinion, that I would rather see lead the nation. And I want to talk about your commitment to America. I want to talk about when you were in Russia, because I can still have that glimpse. But give just the listeners, this is what Gen Next is, and this is how it's transitioned, because I'm not sure they understand.
Okay. Same thing, high level.
Yeah.
We are committed to just opportunity for future generations. Now, what that looks like to us is that we need certain ideas to capture the hearts and the imaginations of the American people, especially people with considerable influence. That's who we tend to focus on as sort of being the lever of change. And so you and the rest of the community, that did not change. I think what we did change is a deeper commitment to values. Gen X really focused on economics, education, and security. And those things are still important, but those things are only important if you attach the right values to them.
Right.
So if I said, I want economic opportunity, but so does Xi Jinping, the head of China.
Right.
But we want to do that very differently.
Totally different strategy.
Totally different strategy. Yeah. Putin wants it too.
Yeah.
Sure. All the bad guys want it.
Yeah.
And what is different is I want that by getting out of people's way. I want that by believing in people. I want that by enabling human flourishing. We talk a lot about, say, capitalism, free enterprise. All that is the voluntary exchange of goods and services.
Right.
That's it. But in order for a voluntary system to work, the people operating in it have to understand the values that make it work, and they have to understand, or the principles that make it work, and they have to understand they have to have the character to make it work. That is why America became the most powerful country in the world and the most prosperous country in the world, because we believed in our people and we expected something from our people, and we need to continue to do that. So all we did from shifting from Gen X to Alder is to say, let's go deeper. What are the fundamentals for living well and living freely? What are those fundamentals? And some of those things should be obvious to us, but as just, watch the news, it's very clear it's not obvious to us anymore.
Yeah.
Free exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
The ability to disagree.
Yeah. Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. Even when you look at Gen Z and millennials and you poll them, that means you poll all these kids about democracy and you poll all these kids about free enterprise, the awareness and appreciation and approval of these things is drastically dropping. I don't blame the kids. I blame the adults. And it's because the adults are not paying attention to these things. The adults are busy. At the Ronald Reagan in his farewell
it's
address.
Almost like we're and especially the media, we're becoming lulled in a sense of this carnal security. It's like
what you use is a comfort crisis.
It is.
Yeah,
it's like we don't even understand what's happening because we're just not aware or being aware or standing up. Or you said change. We want to see change, right? And I want to talk about that. One of the things that when I've spent the most time with you, not only do I love our conversations, the education, I feel more patriotic when I'm with you. Like you are a man that loves America, right?
I do.
Like you do. But I want you to tell us a story about when you were in Russia, because I literally feel like I was there.
Yeah.
And so if you could take us through that real quick, because isn't that one of the meaningful?
That was when it hit me that America's different. Like we throw these stories around that America is the only country ever formed built on an idea of how to live freely. It was definitely the only country at the time.
Yeah.
And now that's spread.
Yes.
But I didn't have an appreciation for that at the time.
Right.
So I'm in Russia. I was there for some wrestling and judo, and I was wearing a kind of a Russian, like a, what do they call that? Like a workout jumpsuit
or whatever. Or something?
No. Like just like a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
And track pants and those things.
Yeah.
So walking around Red Square.
You're how old at the time?
I was like almost 12 maybe.
Okay. Very young.
Young. And I'm walking around Red Square, and this military officer just yelling at me. And I don't know what he's saying, but the only word I could make out is Amerikansky.
Yeah.
And I go to the translator, what's he saying? He's like, he wants to know if you're an American. And I'm like, how? I'm wearing my Russian digs, man.
Yeah.
Like, how did he know?
Yeah.
And he says Americans get told this a lot. He could tell you're an American because you walk like you're free. And it just blew my mind. I even as a kid, I couldn't understand it, but it did capture my imagination. It planted a seed that stuck with me. And then I just always, from then on out, I was curious about purpose. I was curious about big ideas. I was curious about leadership and how people lead with certain values, and they lead with the worldview and how they could rally others. I became very curious about all these things. And then going to college, patriotic. And it's not to say that like our country has.
It's so funny because you say that, and coming from the perspective of born, raised, live free, you don't really get it until you see the contrast. And it just made me think of when we were on the border of the DRC and Burundi.
Yeah.
And I decided that we should go to a nightclub, and everybody thought that was a bad idea. And so we go to this nightclub, and it was like an 80s. It was kind of like an 80s hip hop club. And we're up there, but we're looking over the wall, and directly on the other side, you see guys, military weapons. Like it was like, there's free, and you start realizing, oh my gosh, there's places in the world where there is no freedom,
none,
and people like can't walk around and feel safe,
and not even freedom in terms of safety. That is a factor in a lot of places,
right?
But also freedom to just be yourself.
Yeah.
Or the conditions that allow you to live comfortably. Infrastructure.
Right.
You remember from the border from Rwanda to Congo, it was like a paved road that stopped.
Yeah.
And then it was a dirt road.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And there's a lot of history, a lot of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is the commitment of the people, the values of the people, and the leadership. Both countries have overcome a hell of a lot, including ours. Yeah, we were a colony of Great Britain. Yeah, we've had to fight multiple wars. We've had to deal with the confront and overcome, call it the darkest sides of human nature, slavery, you name it. Even when women didn't have the right to vote, though, people were still coming here in droves. Yeah, including women, because it was still better. Even at some of our worst times, it was still better than any other option. And part of the reason I think why we fight each other so much is because it's an American way to set a high bar. Yeah. Like we set a high bar for living freely. Yeah. And so as a result, if we say life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness for all, well, that's going to have to expand over time. And for millennia, thousands of years, human beings were not able to do that. Yeah. Have not been able to do it at all. So in the in that sense of the entire human experience, the American experience is a blip in the big picture.
Right.
And that's why they when the founding fathers did, they called it the American experiment, because it was something you had to try doing over and over and over and over and over again. And it's that idea of commitment and character and understanding the fundamentals of the system and what makes it work better than others that we have lost. And so we're
so how are we doing in the experiment today? And I mean, this is like threads us right back into like the whole purpose and genesis of Alder.
Yeah. It's mixed. You know, I'm not a person who, you hear a lot of, oh, this is the worst time in history. We're more divided than ever. It's like, well, no, we fought a civil war. Yeah. Actually, in Tennessee now, I live on a Civil War battlefield.
Yeah.
There were, it was a 4-hour battle and over 10,000 casualties of hand-to-hand combat, close proximity, very violent. And we fought that war to confront, I think, one of the darkest parts of human nature, the desire to oppress and control other people.
Yeah.
So that was divisive, right? Right now, we're divisive, but we're also more shallow. And as a result, we're more brittle.
Yeah.
Whereas I think previous generations, there was a bit more, kind of preparation of people to be knowledgeable, to spread knowledge, to come together, to be self-reliant, to be resilient. And those qualities we have to kind of help restore in order to pass on these big ideas. But so one, yes, we are divisive, but I think I worry less about the division. I worry more about the lack of depth.
Yeah.
I worry more about the...
That's more of a decay, huh?
It's more of a decay.
Yeah.
There's a guy, Russ Douth, that wrote a book called, I don't remember, it might have just been called Decadence. But anyway, and it's just a general kind of like atrophy.
Yeah.
And these big ideas, unless they're under attack, World War II, it was all about self-determination.
Yeah.
And, the Holocaust was a factor. The aggressiveness of Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo were a factor. But it was really about, are we going to live lives where we could determine our own destiny?
Yeah.
And a king or a dictator is not going to do it.
Yeah.
It's we're born with this.
Yeah, yeah.
Then we went in and had the Cold War, and we had the threat of, not only did we have the threat of nuclear obliteration, but also we had the threat of, we had to be able to see contrasting worldviews. The way the Soviets was command control. Everything about their system was command control.
Yeah.
Everything about our system was respect human dignity and expect you to do well.
Yeah.
And you will go innovate and you will go create opportunities and you will go do good things.
Yeah.
This is a very different way of looking at not only human
Let people
nature.
govern themselves.
Exactly. Not human nature, but also ordered liberty.
Yeah.
It's a very, very different way of doing it. We haven't had threats like that.
Right.
We've had the longest war that we've ever had in the Middle East. And most Americans haven't had to sacrifice at all.
Yeah.
At all. Most Americans don't even know people in the military anymore.
Right.
More Americans are getting their information from memes and tweets than they are even just reading books.
Yeah.
In schools, civics is just not a priority. Families, I was going to mention, at Ronald Reagan's farewell address, he said that in America, great change begins at the dinner table.
Yeah.
What you're doing with your son, you're taking him with you, have it be a funeral.
But you can look at a lot of our issues in this country, personally and from families, have come from just the war on the family, dude. Not having mom, dad, kids together.
So that's exactly. You're seeing this breakdown all kinds of places. If you have information overload, we're more emotional and divisive. Where fathers are not around. This economist Raj Chetty did a study of mobility across generations, meaning, are you going to be better off than your parents?
Yeah.
Right. And he looked at the difference between Compton and Watts and why one did better than the other. And one of the variables was more fathers in the community.
Yeah.
If you remember in Boys in the Hood, the movie, Lawrence Fishburne's character, how he had this stabilizing force.
Right.
And it wasn't even more fathers in every single home. It was just more fathers in the community.
Yeah.
And
right.
so there's these common sense things.
Yeah.
And what is that really when you think about fatherhood, you go upstream, what do you really value? What are you really committing to? You're committing to give your best to somebody else, your child. And I think if you're going to see a decline in fatherhood, it's because people are choosing to not value that.
Right.
They're not making that commitment anymore. They're distracted for whatever reason.
Or it's just they're so self-interested, right? Yeah. They're so selfish.
And I'm coming from a place of, my dad hasn't been in my life since I was 16.
Yeah.
At all. And that's, and so I'm sort of like a living example of this. And now trying to pour myself into my kids, all Gen X and Alder, even before I had kids, was in some way was about a theme in my life of wanting to be a great dad. And a great dad to me was, a home that is fun and safe and loving and instructive. Like you're teaching them how to grow, how to be the best version of themselves. But it also meant that I have to stand for something that shapes the world in which they're going to grow up.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to show, I guess this is another way to articulate Gen X and Alder.
Right.
Is it's not just about you. It's not just about your family. It's not just about your business. That we are arguing that there are conditions that make those things flourish.
Right.
And we're committed to those conditions.
Right.
We're committed to
and we're not just taking advantage of the systems we've given. We're protecting it. And we're trying to change it and keep it for our kids and their kids.
And so here's what starts to happen is you start setting an example to your peers. And so your peers, I mean, a friend of mine, two friends of mine, actually both members of Alder. One was, they're both entrepreneurs in different businesses. One of them joined Gen X at the time, and he started talking about security issues and education and making a difference and all these people that he's around. It's basic stuff. Like you surround yourself with certain people, they're going to shape your conversation, they're going to shape your identity, they're going to shape your values. And then his buddy on the other side of the country was like, dude, what's wrong with you? Like you're talking about all these heady things and where's this coming from? He's like, I joined this group, Gen X. And so then you start seeing a ripple effect affecting peers.
But there's something that I keep on thinking with that because, we're talking about a lot of issues and the change, but really when you start looking at the change we want to see in the world, we have to start making the change in ourselves.
Exactly.
And it starts with us. And even in parenting, more is caught than taught.
I'm glad you punctuated that. I think that is exactly what it is. It is.
And so part of the Alder model is it's to become more aware. It's personal growth. It's becoming your best human. It's becoming your best father, your best mate, your best.
All we're saying, it's just an ethos that's saying, look, I don't know what's going on in the country right now.
Yeah.
And rather than being all angry about it and bitter about it, I'm going to understand how I could make it better in my own sphere of influence.
Yeah.
In order to do that, I have to be better. Right. I have to be more informed. I have to be better exposed. I have to have access to things that'll help me make a difference. I have to know how to use my resources well. But it all starts with a choice and personal responsibility.
Okay, so there's one thing. We were talking yesterday about the book Discipline No More. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't, but I'm familiar.
So one of the things I just think, because it's like one of those things where, the crux of the book from the way I understand it is that it's not really about discipline. If you're in a situation where you're having to discipline yourself out, you are in the wrong environment. Right? You are in the wrong environment. It talks all these different examples where if you break down cells and you have a cancer, it's like you're not going to discipline yourself out of there. You got to get out of there. And a big theme of this is entrepreneurial, right? And it's so interesting how many of the conversations come with, I packed up my car and got out of my environment. And I ended up being in the place I wanted to be. Obviously, there's a million things you need to do after that. But there was just this whole thing.
Well, it's also, I think it speaks to, again, patriotic over here.
Yeah.
It speaks to the idea of well, I used the word earlier, flourishing, and that basically means the chance to be your best self.
Yeah.
It's not happiness the way we talk about happiness today,
Right.
which is like fleeting. It's the pursuit of happiness, that it is you're going to go for it.
Right.
It's not some fixed destination. It's not a fleeting emotion.
Right.
When the founding fathers wrote, Life, Liberty, Pursuit of Happiness,
Yeah.
it was saying to people that deep within our souls, this is what we need to live well. And then they built a political system that protected that. And that's what made it very different than any other country around the world.
Yeah.
But what does that all depend on? It depends on individuals understanding that and safeguarding it, and then making that choice to pursue. We're a little too enamored with the story of the entrepreneur and the story of the celebrity.
Yeah.
And how they made it.
Yeah.
We're not enamored enough with like the journey.
Yeah.
And what you have to learn, how you have to fail, how you have to rebound.
Well, and it's like there's this thought, oh, happiness means I'm just comfortable all the time. But truthfully, that's not how people are happy. Like suffering creates the contrast. It allows you, you can't appreciate the wins until you experience the losses. It's like, and even being a parent, one of the things I find myself constantly conflicted of is I want to keep my kids away from disappointment and pain. I'm like, what am I doing that for?
No, it's because it's
like, what am I doing that for? Like the thing, and going back to that, because you said something I want to go back to. Father, you haven't talked to him since you were 16, right? I mean, you could have taken that example and just been a bad father. You chose otherwise. Do you want to talk anything about that? Because that's really shaped you as a parent. And I do love the story about your son that you adopted. Like, I think that it's like,
yeah. Let me even, you talk about happiness. I think happiness is living your values. But that's not a bumper sticker thing. I think it's actually really hard
to live your values.
To live your values. It's really hard to live your values, and it's really hard to discover what they are.
Yeah.
And the values are wide ranging. Like I value a good time.
Yeah.
But I also value free enterprise, and I value distribution of power, and I have a lot of different types of values.
Yeah.
And so I have to be studied and committed to them in different ways and rank them. So now when it relates to how do I live happily and live my values, knowing my upbringing, and still to this day have to do a lot of deep work on what is my personal narrative about, am I valuable?
What do you mean by that? That doesn't.
Well, so I grew up, it was just very volatile home.
Yeah.
So a lot of fear.
Yeah.
And a lot of placating and people pleasing and to keep the peace in the home.
Yeah.
And that became a part of my identity.
Yeah.
And it also became a gift.
Yeah.
But it also became a gift that trapped me.
Yeah.
Because you start to lose sight of like, am I being nice because I'm trying to keep people happy, or am I being nice because I'm nice?
What happened if you acted up in your house?
Oh, I'd beat downs.
Yeah.
Just, complete beat downs. So, it was pretty rough, pretty bad. And so having to do that work of, what did all those lessons teach me? That, unless I'm not winning wrestling and judo, I'm going to get beat down. Unless I'm not like in a good mood and performing, I'm going to get beat down. Said another way, unless I'm achieving, unless I'm getting external validation from people, I'm not valuable.
Right.
And so I had to do a lot of that own type of deep work.
So that's a big thing of the question that we're asking others, where the question should really be the question we're asking ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Right? Because we're using like, hey, am I valuable? Well, everybody in my environment is saying I'm not unless I do this, when in reality it has nothing to do with what you achieve to be valuable.
It's all just flipped back around to
and that's
a level
some
of personal
very
responsibility.
difficult when that's the hardware and the software. That's some very difficult stuff to get that virus out, right?
Because it's like, and then when every signal you could imagine is about sub-signal about the certain type of life that you should live. You should be popular. You should have a lot of people who like you. You should have money. You should
because if you're not valued, you're asking everybody to value you, and you're getting like this dopamine hit. When I'm valued by other people, that makes me more valuable, which is really completely an illusion.
It is an illusion. You can't control what other people think.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
My dad always said something. I think he's like, one of his rules was, what did he say? He said, basically, it's none of my business what other people think about me.
I know. Like, there's an enormous amount of wisdom in that.
Right.
But so when I became...
So don't even think about it and worry about it.
But I do think that that journey to bring... I learned early that people living freely without oppression, which is how I grew up, and people living with love they became profoundly important to me at a really young age. And it became part of my worldview. I think that's why I love America, and it's why I love my kids, and it's why I choose to try, but try to live the life that I'm trying to live. It's why I moved to Tennessee, because I'm not in a career that's going to turn me into a millionaire or billionaire. I'm in a career that's going to help me, that live my values, right? Yeah. And so in order to do that, in order to have that career, in order to put my kids on the track.
Is that by design?
What?
That you're living a life of values, because, you said, I'm not going to be a millionaire or billionaire. I've known a lot of people. You have a skill set that when I'm looking at these people far surpasses that. It's just, you're not focused on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. So it's by design.
Yeah, it's more that it's by design. Now, it's not to say also that it's mutually exclusive. I was more so referring to the fact, like, why did I move to Tennessee?
Yeah.
And it's one, because I wanted my kids to be in a space where we have more options to create opportunities for them long term. And one of those things for me was to remain committed to this mission.
Yeah.
And so we moved them. But going back to this point of like decoding to try to live your values.
Yeah.
And deconstruct the sort of noise in your head or get it out of there. After my first son was born, all I ever wanted to be was a dad.
Yeah.
All I ever wanted, I remember some of my earliest memories are wanting to be a dad.
Which is interesting, coming from a family where you don't have a relationship with your dad.
Yeah, I'm super grateful for that. I think part of it, my older brother was a very positive male role model for me. There was still also good things that I did learn from my dad, and I think I was able to compartmentalize like that. But all I wanted to be was a dad. And I remember I could give you example after example of watching and things I was reading, like Hector in the Iliad, and he was a warrior who was so loving too, and powerful and loving, and that blew my mind. Or Mufasa in The Lion King. Yeah. Lawrence Fishburne in Boys in the Hood. Like all these examples to me of like, dang man, that's they're out there.
Yeah.
And so when my son was born, it was like, oh shoot, I don't think I'm up to this.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't really done the work on understanding what my value is. It was just sort of like I didn't like this, so I want that. But I didn't know how to show up for that. And I think that applies in anything. It could be.
Well, how do you, so you said I didn't know how to do the work. How do you do the work?
First, how it showed up, I started being very, very worried that I was going to fail him. So all my insecurities were inflamed.
Yeah.
I wasn't up to the task. This is a sacred responsibility to another human being. And what in the world do I think that I could make any difference here? And so there was that. I'll come back to the work.
Yeah.
Then I had twin daughters. It was like, great, I'm a girl dad times 2.
Yeah.
Right. And that was terrifying for all kinds of reasons. It still is. And then we also, both my wife and I always wanted to adopt independently.
Yeah.
There were not any like big reasons for it or obvious reasons for it in our past, in terms of connection to the actual adoption. But we were very fortunate to have two pregnancies and 3 kids. Yeah. Right. And so then it was like, okay, we have to adopt like this. We have to do this. We get after it. So then we went through the process, and it was heavy because of some twists and turns that ended up taking 3 years. But until we found the guy we found to help us, it was from May to August that we got Bo, my son. And we found out about Bo when he was a week old. I literally was going we were on a trip, a Gen X trip to Poland and Germany.
Yeah.
We had left Auschwitz-Birkenau and we're going to meet Lech Walesa, the freedom fighter revolutionary in Poland.
Yeah.
And I'm also now getting these messages that, hey, there's a baby boy in Nevada who's a week old and he's going to foster care. What do you want to do? And so my son and my wife flew out to get to go meet him, and they're sending me pictures. They immediately fall in love.
Yeah.
And all the terror is going in my head. Everything from it's going to be insanely expensive. All the early reports of how much it was going to cost were like way more than we expected.
Yeah.
And then I started learning about his own family of origin, some of the turbulence that his biological family had. Jail time, drugs, and extended family. And it's like, I'm looking at this just like, this is heavy. How in the world? Sure. I can't even like keep my own head straight. How am I going to like create, like help him be able to do this? So just self-limiting. And I think for me, through the course of a lot of these things, and now the question of like, how do you go kind of decode and find your values? I think there's like the basic kind of tactical things like journaling and meditation. I think there's bigger things like faith.
Isn't that weird though? Because when you're saying that, I'm trying to think of the work, and there's a constant like lens that we look at the world from, and it's impossible not to project that lens on other people, but it's just based on our experience.
Oh, for sure.
And there's just so many of these limiting things that constantly play in the movie theater of our mind that stop us from action, like real action towards what we want. And so as I'm thinking about what the recipe for work is, it's finding a way to do the right thing. I first of all, finding out what the right thing is for you, and finding a way to do the right thing against all the voices in your head. And that consistently being a slave to that habit.
And over. So one, it's
slave to the habit.
It's right? Whatever practice you have of reflection. I think there's also whatever practice you have around purpose. You know, I would give it a faith form.
Yeah.
I don't, not everybody does.
Yeah.
Also, I think seek out people who will push you.
Yes.
Who will be good for you. And you were a big role for me when you were telling me, I think I was debating some big moves, like, what to do about, what do I do about Gen X? What do I do about growing my family? What do I do about trying to make more money and more opportunity and all these things? And you told me, you're like, you are addicted to fear.
Yeah.
You said it to me.
Yeah.
You're addicted to fear.
Yeah.
And I had never thought of it that way. And you introduced this whole new paradigm in my life. And I started thinking, I don't want to be addicted to anything.
Yeah.
I want to be addicted to just being awesome.
Yeah.
And so
addicted to being awesome.
It's just like, I want my whole life to just be a constant effort of just trying to be awesome.
Yeah.
And you put that
okay, so go through, there's something with that, because you look at, so we're talking a little faith, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the difference in your opinion between fear and faith?
Well, first, the context I was giving it in terms of faith was about believing in a higher power.
Right.
Now, but to the point of faith or fear, I think faith overcomes fear.
Well, but if you break them down, in fear, right? I think the definition of faith is the evidence, the substance of things not seen. No, the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things not seen, right?
Yeah.
So fear is the same thing. We're have a vision of how bad it's going to be that keeps us from acting, where in faith you're like, I don't know what I can't see, but I know that I have to move into the shadows.
And so going back to a theme in our conversation is, what values do you attach to that construct?
Right.
So the difference between faith and fear, if they're definitionally the same, that what makes them different is the value you attach to it. So faith is about possibilities.
Right.
Faith is about pursuit.
Right.
It doesn't, even if we're not talking about higher power, it could be faith in yourself. It could be faith in
going back to
the people around you.
Faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
So it's like fear keeps us from acting. Faith, the only way we get to that hope is through the action, the work, doing what's uncomfortable, doing like moving through the lens that you grew up with, it's keep it holding you back, and just doing it, like stepping into the shadow and realizing the light will come to meet you. Right?
Yeah. I'm surprised at how few people how little people do this.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we did a conversation with, we had a briefing conversation with Stephen Pressfield, the novelist.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant novelist,
Yeah.
historical fiction. And he writes about doing the work and fighting the resistance.
Yeah.
The resistance is fear coming to take you and suck you back.
Yes.
And take you off of faith.
Yeah.
And so, given that he writes a lot about ancient civilizations, and I went through, I got really curious about it somewhat recently, a few years ago. Wanted to read the whole Bible, wanted to read the Quran, the I Ching, the Tao, all these different, the Gita, because I wanted to understand, like, how did people in ancient times understand flourishing?
Yeah.
Also wanted to understand the founding father era. What were they wrestling with? Not with our modern eyes, because we value, at the fundamental level, we value the same things, but it gets activated differently, because once the freedom spreads, you start to value things differently, which is another conversation. But when I'm going and I'm thinking about the ancients and the founding fathers and that generation, or even the World War II generation, you read their letters, hugely reflective.
Yeah.
Hugely reflective about who they are.
Right.
What's going on in the world. What's
it's
going
almost
on
like
in life.
it's like a constant, like, accountability of yourself,
Totally.
of your awareness.
And
right?
so I asked Stephen Pressfield this question, and I was like, what is it that ancients had that we don't have? And then we had the conversation about it. And, this is not a scientific thing here, but it's one, there was a level of reflection about who you are, why does life matter, and how do I play a role in it mattering? Across all faith traditions, across all time, across all cultures, that was a pretty dominant question that human beings ask themselves, that we don't ask ourselves enough today. Another one was an interest in posterity, an interest in legacy. It's like, am I making things better for those who come after me?
Yeah.
And we're so short-sighted, we just don't even do that anymore.
Yeah.
And a third thing was, there was an element of a coming together. There's always this idea of a band of brothers.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Is that like community or
community?
Yeah, community. Okay.
Community. There was always that interest in community of let's come together.
Yeah.
And so be my best self with others, and that will put me in a position to make things better for those who come after me. And I think that those are pretty important ingredients for doing the work. Doing the work. And if you do the work, you'll live a more meaningful life. That means you're going to have more fun. You're going to have less stress. You're also going to be more powerful, because you're going to live your values, and that transforms yourself, but then it starts to transform the people around you, and it shapes the culture of the entire country.
Yeah.
And that
the ripple effect.
The ripple
starts with you, your
but
family,
we have
your
this
community.
we have this weird expectation that things happen quick, and I need point A to point B, and you pick one thing and mobilize and whatever. It's like, oh, let's just focus on politics. I mean, politics is like consuming everybody's mind today. It's like, when did the role of government become such a dominant thing in America, and the federal government especially, in American people's lives? They need to be thinking about, just what can I do to make things better in my community? What can I do to make things better for my family? And how could I be informed about what's going on so I could make good decisions when I'm cutting a check to a politician or I'm voting?
Yeah.
It's basic stuff.
So I want to jump back to, you're the CEO of Alder, which is technically a nonprofit, right? So as being a CEO of a nonprofit, like, in a normal CEO role, you're totally focused on the bottom line.
Yeah.
So how do you stay as a CEO? What are your KPIs? What are you focused on? What are your metrics to measure and improve performance?
Good question. So we're a little different as a nonprofit because we have a for-profit business model.
Right.
So it's a membership business model. It's a subscription business model. And part of the reason why we did that is because we call it generational leadership. That if you're a generational leader, you are committed to doing all the things we're talking about, transcending your ego, reflecting, knowing your values, living your values, And you're doing that for the betterment of future generations and the greater good. That's being a generational leader.
Right.
And so
it seems sort of cliche, the generational leader, but it's like when you think about it, it's like, is there a more important role that somebody could actually take on?
And I would say no.
There's just none,
just like,
right?
If you want to live a meaningful life,
but if you could just say, hey,
on,
the problem with society and the world is I want everybody's focus to be a generational leader, which starts with personal change.
Exactly.
Starts with me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we did a subscription revenue model because it needed to be something that was a recommitment.
Right.
So an Alder is an interesting thing because
so just so the listeners here, as a member, you join, right? But it's not just you have the money, you join. You go through.
No, you have to be invited, and
you have to go through a process.
We're looking for to what extent are you aligned on these values,
right?
We're looking for, and values are twofold. Values are big ideas about human flourishing, like do you appreciate free and open societies?
Yeah.
Values are also, do you appreciate listening to other points of view and being curious and being a winsome person?
Yeah.
And that lends to more chemistry. So we'll evaluate those things. We also want diversity in all kinds of different forms. We also want to make sure people are committed. We don't, this isn't like a country club where you're going to be, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be tracking up your benefits.
Right.
This should be a commitment. This should be a lifestyle.
Yes.
An advancement of a worldview that's living within you. And we do it together. So you join, and you get invited, and then we onboard it, and then there's all kinds of different experiences, different types of events, traveling around the world, content, perspective. Our job is to arm you to be a freaking awesome citizen. Like if we can make you an amazing person, an amazing citizen, that's what we're trying to do. And if you're already that, then we want to use you to go out there and influence others, because that's how culture changes. And if you change culture, you change politics, you change all these things.
Right.
So going back to your question on the business side, is there is a big rise in the purpose economy, the kind of double bottom line.
Yeah.
And so we will look at how are members engaged in the world? How are they time, attention, money, the volume of causes that they're getting behind, because there's a network effect to this. We want our members to be these platoons that will go out and do great things in the world. But we also want to play a role in helping expose them to the opportunities that will introduce them to sometimes their own values, but sometimes it's like an initiative that they could get behind. And those initiatives will range from, I'm talking to my kids more about this stuff. Like I had a member tell me recently, really accomplished guy, he sold his company, and he's like, I always thought of myself as a great dad. Like I tuck my kids at night. I have a great relationship with all my kids. I have a great relationship with my wife. I'm really involved in my community. But I never thought about what makes this place special, ever. Never talked to them about it either. Just totally foreign.
Yeah.
And he's like, I was just taking them for granted. But now it's something greater is at stake.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of change. We also, as you know, and you've helped, we've done quite a bit of work in counterterrorism and counter-extremism. We exposed our members to a big world challenge, one facing this country, which is several years ago, the spread of homegrown radicalization. White supremacy, Islamism, all these different forms of radicalization. And so we just got a reputation for being like purposeful, entrepreneurial people. And so we helped an NGO in London and worked with Jigsaw, one of the Google or Alphabet companies. And we built a worldwide community of former violent extremists and survivors of terrorism. Our members helped fund it. They helped develop the KPIs. They helped develop the plans and whatever. We've seen members get involved in political campaigns. Members are very close to Jared Polis, who's the governor of Colorado, and members are very close to Ron DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida, Democrat, Republican. We've seen members go start charter schools. We've seen members get involved in helping families with terminally ill children, Miracles for Kids. I mean, this is what you want to see more of, right?
Yeah.
And most of the time, the members end up being exposed to these opportunities through the experiences with us, through meeting one another, because it's an institution that exposes and shapes people. So the KPIs that we look at are, what is the mobilization of the members and what is the engagement of the members in that journey?
Yeah.
And then where the business KPIs come in is like, we got to make you want to be there.
Yeah.
So we have to create awesome content. We have to create awesome events. We have to have awesome people. We have to expose you to really impactful initiatives.
It's funny because my experience with a life that's like, I mean, there's something about the longer you work in a career, you just find yourself doing the same thing over and over and over again. But through some of the summits, through some of the experiences that I find myself being pulled out of my world to focus and have conversations and thoughts and shape how this gets better. But it's amazing how it's like we don't have enough of that pulls us out.
Doesn't it?
Right?
Well, because everybody's busy.
Busy, right?
We're very busy. And not only, I think what I wish people would appreciate more of is, one, I think, is the need to step out.
Yeah.
But also when that happens, you become more innovative.
Yeah.
Like you're going to get ideas from people out of left field.
Right.
You're like, oh, I should do that with my kids.
Yeah.
Or
totally.
I could do that with my business.
Yeah.
Or even just like, you know what? Like a lot of our members, you included, who became very supportive of our national security work, you probably never in your life thought you'd be a national security philanthropist.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
But you did. And you changed a lot of lives and you helped stop terrorist attacks. I mean, that's real.
Yeah.
That's real. And then even President Obama is showcasing the work at the White House.
Right.
And it shifted paradigms. But that only happened because people showed up to learn.
Yep.
People showed up to build community. People wanted to explore their values, and then they chose to lead.
Dude, there's a common theme on everything, and it's showing up, right? And
participating.
But showing up by design, not by default. A few more things, and then we're going to wrap up. One, for any of the listeners that are listening, I mean, we've talked a lot about Alder. If they want to get involved, if they want to get connected, if they're connected to the thoughts and the things that you're saying, what's the easiest way?
Email me, michael@alder.co.
michael@alder.co. Where can they learn more if they
you could go to alder.co. There's some stuff about our values. And then we'll connect them with somebody on the team. You know, we haven't historically publicly promoted ourselves.
Right.
We'll probably do more getting not so much our name out there, but getting our ideas out there.
Yeah.
And getting the work that our members are doing out there.
Right.
So we're going to be doing a lot more of that.
I really could say being a part of this organization is deeply impactful to my life, but sometimes it feels like we're a part of a secret society.
Yeah.
Right? People are like,
there was
Gen Next. Like, what is that? What are you guys actually doing? And then they start getting into like, I want to be a part of a group that's successful, that wants to work, that wants to have better families, that wants to make a change, that wants to leave the world better for our kids, right?
Can I tell a quick story about what could things happen when you show up?
Yeah.
And how this happens and the secret society thing? One thing a lot of our members did a number of years ago is we started seeing the proliferation of social technologies, and we were seeing regimes around the world be very oppressive and try to block people out from these technologies. And so we started seeing like kids in Egypt would use Bluetooth to organize, like assemble, which is not a fundamental right in Egypt. Women were using YouTube to build a movement to protest not being allowed to have driver's licenses in Saudi Arabia. Kids in Colombia were using Facebook to organize mass protests against FARC. You know, example at Twitter, Moldova, a communist rigged election, and they're doing all these things. And we're like, we want to help them. So a number of our members were helping put together summits, and Jack Dorsey came, and Dustin Maskowitz of Facebook came, and Undersecretary Glassman from the Bush administration came, and Hillary Clinton came, and all this stuff. So we're basically training young people to use technology to organize for human rights. That was basically what we were doing. Fast forward, the Arab Spring happens, and these dictators are being toppled, and these countries are, going, and some of the people we trained were part of these movements.
Yeah.
We didn't expect to be toppling dictators.
Yeah.
But so Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks.
But those were the seeds that were planted that actually toppled the dictators.
Definitely. I'm not trying to give the impression like we caused this. So
or we're taking credit.
Not taking credit. Yeah. But I do think we played a role.
Yeah.
In a highly disruptive world event. And we'll see. Another conversation. But Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks guy, he exposed communications between governments, and they were kind of talking about how these civil society, us, and some other groups and organizations were out there doing it. And then he wrote an op-ed in a newspaper. I don't remember which one it was. But anyway, he wrote an op-ed where he referenced a couple of our members, and he referenced Gen X as like basically a conspiracy, that we're appendages of the State Department and the CIA out there kind of mobilizing. But you know how the idea was born? A bunch of our members were all fired up about a bunch of stuff they were learning about from another member, Jared Cohen, who's thinking about the world in a really big way.
Yeah.
I think we were at a bar. We were probably pretty buzzed. And we were like, let's go make a difference on this. This sounds really good. And then suddenly we're a conspiracy, there's dictatorships and whatever. So you never know how things could happen when you show up, when you participate. And that's ultimately what we want to see more of. But to your question about getting it out there, right now it's just alder.co, and we have a small team of about 20, and someone on the team will walk you through it and connect you. Especially, we have a vibrant community here in Orange County, and Orange County fueled the growth of the community all across the country.
Well, we have so much more to talk about. We could talk for hours. A couple final questions. Is there a quote that you live by? A mantra?
A lot.
Is there one that's top of mind right now that you're really thinking about?
A quote I haven't used enough lately, but that's really coming to mind that I care a lot. And that's something along the lines of there's three types of people. Those who let things happen, those who wonder what happened, and those who make things happen. And I think we need more people who really claim their values and their agency to act on those things and make things happen.
So for all those that are listening, if you're one of those people, reach out to us. Thanks so much for coming, brother. Always good to see you.
Love you. You too.
Thanks for listening to Room, presented by the Smith Group. This episode was hosted by Tim Smith and produced by Michelle Akers. Chris Stacy is our studio director. Editing by Jake Austin. Special thanks to Pacific Staging and Sandy Newport.